This is Gary by the chalkboard. My guest today from Australia is Chris Tazreiter. Chris is a father and grandfather and loves being in both of those roles. He has a very interesting podcast called A PhD in Me, which we'll be definitely talking more about. And in his life, Chris, you desire to help people find joy and love and inner peace in their life. So welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for this chat by the chalkboard.
Yes. I am thankful you're from Australia. I think people from Texas and Australia have some sort of connection. I connected with a woman 25 years ago who was just in a chat room, and she was thrilled that I was from Texas, and I was thrilled she was from Australia. And it seems like we have a similar, I don't know, just a nostalgic feeling about people from Australia here in Texas.
Right.
Maybe it's because of the heat and the dust or what we've seen on television. So,
and the vast open plains.
Yes, you have a lot of that here in Texas. And I know that what we've seen on movies anyway, there, it looks that way. So I appreciate having you on from Australia and getting your perspective from living there. So
cool.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is something that I've noticed in my own life, and I noticed that you mentioned it to me, that when men meet each other, especially men, we tend to ask each other, "What do you do?" And a lot of times that's connected to a career, what we do as work. And you mentioned that you have difficulty answering that now. Why do you have difficulty answering that?
Because the shift that's occurred in me over the last couple of decades, the expansion in my consciousness, my awareness, my worldview, my life view, means that I just don't identify with what I do anymore. I feel like, I'm this this expression of consciousness, life, experiencing life, and I can answer the questions if somebody really needs to know and specifically asks me the question, but it's just not how I identify or what I identify with anymore.
So it's kind of like I am not what I do, but this is the experience I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, I have done so many different things, and all of them have been a wonderful part of this experience of life and part of this learning journey and part of the growth. But it's not who I am.
Yeah. I have 3 children. You have, well, a combination of 11 children and 9 grandchildren.
Yes.
And I would imagine that every one of those grandchildren is a unique experience just with them.
Yes. And I find children my greatest teachers. And at the moment, I have the privilege of looking after, and when I say 9, the 9th one is actually still inside his mother. So he hasn't actually come out into the physical world yet. So the youngest one is 9 months old, and I have the privilege of looking after him once a week on each Monday. And I actually did yesterday. And I just learned so much from spending that time with him. And my youngest daughter, when she was 2 years old, became my greatest teacher at that time. So yes, I love little children, and I love watching them and observing them and learning from them.
I find it fascinating what wisdom can come from the mouth of a child. Sometimes I'm sure you've experienced that with your children and especially your grandchildren, and just stand back and be amazed at what happens.
Yeah, well, my youngest daughter, I had the privilege and still have the privilege of raising a blended family with 11 children. And when we got together, there was 6 of mine. My wife had 4, and we had 1 together. And that youngest child, when she was about 2 years old, I really started to watch and to observe her. The previous children I had fathered got all of the loving and caring and nurturing I was able to give them as a father, but I was a different person at the time. And I still believe that as parents, it's our job to teach our children what we learned and what we know. And by that stage, I had so realized that that's not what we're meant to do. And I had a completely different outlook on life. And so I watched this beautiful young child just express the joy of being alive, express the joy of her being in this life. And she would laugh and dance and giggle. And she was just happy. She would sing songs, not that she had learned, but that just she made up the words and the melody as they came out of her. And she didn't care if anybody liked it or if it was good enough. And every person she met was another friend to say hello to and to meet. She just expressed the joy of being alive. And I realized that that's actually how we all arrive initially, just as this pure potential, this pure love and the potential to have any experience and any thought before the world gets hold of us and drums all of its dogma and all of the learned beliefs of the world into us. And her mother and I made this conscious decision that we would just allow her to develop and express who she came here to be, rather than demand that she think how we think or believe what we believe, and just allow her to grow and develop organically. And she's 13 now, and I think she's the most mature 13-year-old I've ever met, and her emotional maturity is greater than a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds that I've met. So, yeah.
It seems like in life that children have this unfettered, natural way of expressing joy at whatever they're joyful about. And
Yes.
then we forget it, or we go through experiences that seem to block that. And when we get to be adults, at least this is my experience of it, I had to relearn that in my life. Did you have
Yes.
to relearn that in your life as you grew? You talked about 20 years ago or so, you started on a different understanding in life. How did
Um,
that happen?
yeah, I don't know that it feels like I've always been a naturally happy person. Um, my and you alluded to it earlier. I came at one point to call this journey my PhD in me. Something happened about 19 years ago that turned it from an unconscious journey to a conscious journey, and it became a very conscious and intentional journey. But I mean, I went through the same process that you're describing and that every child goes through. And I came to recognize it as a domestication process. You know, this free spirit arrives in this life, and then the world goes through this domestication process, like, you know, taking a free horse, and, you know, they still call it breaking a horse, and then putting it into the confines of a paddock in a fenced in area. And that's almost like what happens to us as people. We depending on what part of the planet we land on, you know, which tribe and which village and which culture, that culture and that religion and that politics is drummed into us as the truth, and so that becomes our default operating system, our learned beliefs. And it's not until later on, and what you're describing is a journey of recognizing that I have all these unhelpful beliefs, some of which don't serve me so well, and I now need to go through a journey of choosing my own. And that's what the whole PhD in me concept is just that.
That's fascinating. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I've also experienced this. I don't know how to describe it, this change in life by living consciously rather than unconsciously. So when you began to live consciously, as you described, was this uh, did it happen in a moment, or was this some gradual awareness that began to grow in you?
Okay, so the answer to the question is both. On one hand, my journey has always been very, very gentle and very, very incremental. But there was one event which I think was responsible for switching it from an unconscious journey to a conscious journey. Um, I had always had a best friend relationship with my mother. And in the second half of 2001, just a few weeks after 9/11, she had gone through this for the second time in her life, a journey with cancer, and this time decided not to get it treated. And I was standing by her bedside with a couple of other people, um, watching as she took her last breath. And I stood there and I watched as the life started to leave that body. And within a few minutes, and I lost all track of time, but within a few minutes, I realized that that body that was lying there was no longer my mother, that it was just an empty shell. And the body that I thought was my mother, who gave birth to me, who raised me, taught me, loved me, who was my best friend, wasn't actually that body. It was the essence that was inside of her. And I watched as that essence left. And so at that point, her body became an empty shell and entropy started to set in. And I realized that we spend so much time worrying about what our body looks like, if people like how we look, if we're good enough. And it's such a misguided view and understanding of who and what we actually are. And yeah, it was a moment in which the curiosity in me went to another level. I mean, I gave myself the gift of an insatiable curiosity right from the start of this life. And it became a more conscious and intentional curiosity to just question everything. And it's funny because if you had spoken to me 30 years ago, the difference in my worldview and life view was diametrically apart. You know, I was raised in a very traditional Catholic country in Austria, and came to Australia at the age of 9. So all of the dogma of organized religion was drummed into me. All of the fear of everything outside of that religion, the things that were drummed into me, homophobia, Islamophobia, everything Eastern was evil, and so on and so on and so on. And if when you speak to me today, there's just no resemblance of that set of learned beliefs and that operating system now. And so that was a very conscious and intentional journey, always driven by an insatiable curiosity to question everything.
Oh, I agree. And that's the way to live. And that's what you're doing with your granddaughter and your children.
My
That's what
friends.
we have to do with our children, is not so much teach them anything, but just foster that wonderful spirit inside them that will
Yes.
just question and search for themselves.
Yes.
And when they begin to seek, they'll find. And that's really, to me, what it means to be a parent. And I assume that's what it's going to mean if I'm a grandparent one day.
Yes. And what they find isn't necessarily what I found. And that's the point, that's okay, because there are almost 8 billion people on this planet. And the calculations, the mathematicians say there's been a total of about 100 billion on the planet so far in the history of humanity. Every single one of them has had a unique experience of life that's never been replicated, and, as in my understanding, never will. So for us to think that somebody else has to agree with our worldview or our life view or our experience of life is such a misunderstanding of this whole journey and the whole purpose of this thing we call life.
Yeah, I agree. I have completely changed the way I think, and it's similar to yours. Growing up in a very conservative Christian environment where you're taught certain things, this is what you're supposed to believe, and then when I came to those times where I started questioning things, I had questions from my heart, not just logic things, but questions from here, not getting answers, keeping searching, causing trouble. It seemed like I was causing trouble at the time. Um, but that kind of curiosity is necessary for growing, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It's there's a term that often emerged in the book that I wrote, which is also called A PhD in Me, and the podcast is basically a natural extension of that book. And it is the term making known the unknown, and that's what we're here for. We're not here. There's this funny metaphor that many people go to bed in the evening, put their piece of chewing gum on the bedside table, and then in the morning pick up and put the same stale piece of chewing gum back in their mouth and have the same experience of life over and over and over again. Right?
Mm.
But that's not what we're meant to do. We're meant to make known the unknown, experience things that we don't know yet, that we haven't experienced yet. And once we've known it and experienced it, we're not meant to repeat it over and over again, because then the whole reason for being here kind of disappears, and we're just waiting for the body to wear out and entropy to set in.
Yeah. You talked about in this journey of a PhD in me,
Yes.
um, that you say to question everything, put aside your dogmas and everything that you think you know, and listen to your inner voice. What is how would you describe listening to your inner voice?
I guess it firstly comes from that recognition that's and for me it consciously came when I watched my mother leave this life, is that there is a part of me on the outside experiencing life, and we can call that our personality and our ego, and then there is my essence inside, which is observing that journey and that process, and the two are meant to share this experience of life. And so the problem is that we are taught that we live in a mechanical universe made of matter, and a mechanical body that wears out like a machine wears out. And so too often there just is not even an awareness of that essence and that inner voice or that intuition or whatever. And the first step is to become aware of it, and then to learn to listen to it. And I guess the world shouts and your inner voice whispers. And so it is a process of learning to quieten your life and quieten your mind a little bit, so that conversation becomes clearer and clearer. And, in the years that it took to write my book, the book is written as a conversation between Chris Essence and Chris Personality. And the more questions I ask, the more answers he, she provides for me. And the better my questions, the better the answer. So part of this journey for me has been to learn to ask better and better quality questions, because in that process, when I ask a question, the question and the answer are energetically linked. They always come into existence simultaneously. So the moment I ask a question, an answer appears. Whether I hear it or not is another thing. and the answer is always contextual. So it can't be better than the question, and the answer can't be heard or delivered in a different context in which the question was asked. So I ask my questions in the context of what I view and what I see and what I understand. And so as that expands, my questions get better and better and the answers get better and better. But the answers always come from the inside out. You know, so many people spend their life seeking questions outside of themselves. I mean, I'm somebody who loves learning, who loves studying. I've done so many courses and they've always been so valuable. But I realized that all the answers I'm really seeking come from the inside out, not from the outside in. And there was a phrase born inside of me, and that is that the age of the guru is over. The age of self-mastery is here. And we are meant to look inside for the answers that we're looking for, not to gurus on a pedestal.
Well, that's really fascinating to me, what you said about the answers come from within us.
Yeah.
Because over the last 5 years, this incremental awareness came to me that that's the case, that everything I experience is within me, but I had spent so much of my life looking for the answers outside of me,
Yes.
never being satisfied with what I found until I realized, oh, if I learn to be still, like you said, and listen, like you were mentioning, these answers come. I can't explain it in words, but they come. And when they come, there's a great clarity there that I
Yeah.
just know, oh, I'm connected to something much greater than I understand, that's providing guidance for me. Do you experience things like similar aspects of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Um, yeah.
How important to you is learning to be still? People call it, or can call it, meditation. I like to call it meditation. There's meditative things that I do. Sometimes that involves being physically still, but I've learned to do it no matter what this body is doing. But how important would you say it is to learn that stillness in order to learn to listen?
You just touched on one of my favorite topics. Um, so there's two answers, or an answer from two different directions to your question. On the question of meditation, I always had a really difficult relationship with structured meditation. Now, if you really knew me, you know that I'm kind of always doing something different to what the masses do, and whatever the masses do, I usually go in the opposite direction. And it was the same with this, that people were trying to teach me meditation, and I never fully connected with the process of a structured meditation, of setting aside a time in my diary and sitting down cross-legged, going like this and whatever else. It just, something didn't quite feel right. I mean, I did it, but I was having to force myself to do that. And at some point, well, it came from a strange direction, because one day I was going for a walk up this hill behind the house where we were living at the time, taking my dog for a walk. And I was walking back down this dirt trail. My dog was running in front of me. And suddenly I had this overwhelming urge to start laughing. And anybody who was watching me would have thought, oh, he's a bit insane. You know, I just started laughing. And I was not laughing for any particular reason. I had this overwhelming feeling of happiness and joy. And it wasn't, again, for any particular reason other than I just felt happy. And I realized at that moment that I can be happy because I choose to be happy, not because of anything that's happening in my external life, not because of my job or the people around me or the balance of my bank account or any external reason other than I just chose to be happy. And so at that moment was born a conscious understanding that more and more often each day I could just choose, every time I thought of it, to feel overwhelmingly joyful. And it started off as micro bursts of love, peace, and joy. And I found that love, that feeling of love, peace, and joy inside of me, that the three are very much linked. Being happy, being full of love and full of inner peace, the more often those microbursts appeared, they started to meld together and just become a default state of inner joy. And it's not that I permanently live in this state of bliss. I still get triggered sometimes and react to things. But when that happens, it's like I'm taken out of my default state. And so I recognize it almost instantly. And then the journey back into that inner peace happens fairly naturally and fairly quickly. It's like they, in the science of epigenetics, they say that every one of our cells is listening to us. And I've so come to recognize that, because if something triggers me, if I get stressed or I get angry, within a few minutes, within 10 minutes, it's like every cell in my body is screaming at me saying, "What are you doing, you idiot? This feels horrible. Can you stop it already?" Right? And oh yeah. And that's like this warning bell saying, okay, it's time to get back into that state of natural inner peace. And I find it hard these days to even imagine how the majority of people live in a state of stress and anxiety and worry and fear and anger most of the time, that's their default state. I cannot even relate to that anymore and imagine what it must feel like inside a body that does that. And so with that also came that stillness, and that stillness came initially in microbursts, but I've learned to just, and I think you alluded to it in your question, to just quieten my mind wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. So I find myself in a meditative state, in a state of communicating with whatever, with the universe, with my essence, or just have no mind, just to be completely still with no thoughts at all, many times a day. So I don't, that has become my spiritual practice. If you ask me what my spiritual practice was, it is that I don't have a practice of having a time to meditate at a set time in my diary. I found that unnatural. Now, I don't say that it's not the right thing for other people to do, and there are many people who love that and whose experience of life is enriched by that practice. It's just not how I experience life and how I was meant to experience that quietening and that stillness.
I think it's the difference between, how do I describe it? Form and experience. And I remember talking about it in relating to martial arts. When students begin martial arts, they all learn the same foundation,
Yes.
because you have to throw punches and kicks from the same base. But as you learn and you get better, your expression of it becomes unique to you.
Yes.
And that's the only way to improve in martial arts or in anything else, is you have to find your own expression of it, not copying someone else, but learning how you do it. How does it arise from here?
Yeah, and that word copying, one of the things that hinders our journey through life so much is comparison. And, we are taught to compare ourselves to other people. And yet I realized at some point, if no other person is having the same experience of life that I am, how can I legitimately ever compare myself to any other human being? It's such a stupid, futile exercise. And it brings so many feelings of inadequacy and whatever else. And I thought, nah, I'm going to stop doing that. It's just not productive.
Yes. Yes. And I have two daughters who are both teenagers, and I am slowly implanting that in them, because a lot of times there's a response when one of them comes back from school of comparing herself to others. And fortunately have a can have good conversations with her, and things are taking root. She'll mention it to me and think about it. But if you live that way, it will tear you apart if you keep comparing yourself to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your thoughts there on what it means to be still, because I have never been a still person most of my life, whether it's physically or mentally. The intellect just would run and run and run and run all the time. And I used to it used to make me really upset when I began to try meditation, when it seemed like this could never be still. And when I began to understand, oh, I don't have to try to still the mind. It's like trying to be happy. I remember you were talking about happiness a few minutes ago, being this natural state of you. And I remember watching a video. This woman was asking this guru about how to be happy. And she was saying, I'm trying to be happy. I'm just trying. And he said, you don't have to try to be happy.
Yes.
When you were 4, did you try to be happy when you were 4? No, it was your natural state.
Yes.
Your unnatural state is unhappiness and trying to be happy.
Yeah. And it's funny because from that experience on that hill, um, there was no effort went into that feeling of inner joy and inner peace. It was an intention. And I felt something at that moment, and I set an intention to feel that over and over again. And I started, I play lots of little games with my mind. And one of them was that there were little trigger points. So every time I walked up to an elevator, something triggered me thinking about that moment and thinking about being happy. The other thing that I sort of used as a trigger was the word thank you, because I realized that every time a thought of gratitude came into my mind, I was filled with overwhelming feelings of inner love and peace and joy. And so every time I walked up to an elevator, every time I got a takeaway coffee, it became a trigger for me to say thank you for the gift of my life. And then thank you for whatever else I felt grateful for at that moment. And that feeling of gratitude became this little game, which after a while, it just became automatic. But yeah, it was, I don't know what prompted me to do it, but walking up to an elevator, getting a takeout coffee became the trigger for me to think about gratitude, and then to have this overwhelming feeling of inner peace. And then the more often, I had those, I refer to them as microbursts initially. And the more often those microbursts came, they started to blend together into a default state.
Yeah, that elevator thing is interesting. That became a trigger to a reminder. I
Yeah.
guess these physical things outside of us are reminders. I just thinking about what you said, looking at these little things that trigger me to do that. Sometimes it's just a flower or something beautiful about the sunset, where it causes me to pause and stop for a second and go, oh, I'm just really thankful for that gratitude. Yeah, I love that. That's one of the things I was really missing in my life, um, not too long ago. was the simple act of gratitude, of being
Yes.
thankful every day. I began to practice that in the morning. When I would wake up, I would sit in my bed and I would be thankful, not necessarily for anything, just being thankful and feeling that gratitude. And over time, it began to overflow into other parts of my day. And you had mentioned that a minute ago, where um, those microbursts, you as you call it, of joy and love, when that would happen, then you started uh, seeing it kind of saturate other parts of your life and your day, and those things started coming together. So I really appreciate that the way you described that. Hmm.
And that is by definition what the PhD in me is. And the book and the message in the book is an invitation for each person who's ready to hear that invitation to embark on their own PhD in me journey, to set the intention to live a conscious life of discovery, of being more curious, of questioning everything. And not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because I honor every journey that every person has been on to get to this place. Every different religion, every different political view, every different path and different journey. But the question in me was, how much of the beliefs inside of me did I choose, and how many were put into me involuntarily in the first 7 years of my life, when I just was a sponge and just absorbed everything from the world and the people around me. And so, yeah, that's what is waiting for every person to embark on, is to just recognize that, yes, I have a lot of learned beliefs, but I am not those beliefs. And many of my reactions, much of my behavior and my speech are on autopilot because of the beliefs that were put into me. And so there is a question of A, discovering them, B, having a conversation with them and seeing, are they really true? Are there more truths and different truths? And do those beliefs really serve me and serve humanity well? Or could I expand on them and allow them to grow? So
I noticed that some people are hesitant to begin to question, especially openly question, because they meet resistance, whether they're from their family or maybe in a religious group and setting. I definitely experienced that in my life, with not with my immediate family at all, but definitely in church and with friends. Um, did you ever experience anything like that?
yes, absolutely. Because and I guess for me, there's something I said earlier that I recognize again. Um, my shift and my change was not like a volcanic eruption. It was not some massive bolt of lightning from the sky. it was gentle, and it was incremental. And so the people around me learned to recognize that shift and that change. And some people chose to go with it and some people didn't. And that was absolutely okay. So one of the things that I've recognized in the way that we do relationships, particularly close relationships, is that we take a snapshot of the person that we meet and fall in love with, and then have a relationship with that snapshot. And people often say to each other years later, oh, you're not the person that I married, or you're not the person that I fell in love with. And I go, oh, duh, you're not supposed to be, because we're meant to be on this constant journey of change and of growth and of evolution. So it happens that people don't grow and expand at the same pace, and that people sometimes don't accept the growth and the change in a person. And so it's often and sometimes a natural thing that your paths will lead in a different direction if that happens, and hopefully graciously and lovingly and caringly. But have I experienced it? Yes, absolutely. It's just a natural part of this process that as I grow and expand, other people will move in different directions or choose to stay where they are. And this is where, life is about constantly connecting with people who touch our life. And there are constantly, like this podcasting journey, there was a period of time where I felt, gosh, there are so few people on this journey that I'm on. But now I'm just realizing there are just millions and millions of people all around the world who are on this same journey that I'm on. And the more of them like you who I connect with, it just brings me so much joy to and such hope and such a positive outlook for humanity when I connect with more and more people who are on this same path and this same journey.
Yeah, I agree. There was a period of time that I thought I am all alone in this. I have no I have no one to talk to. I have these things that I'm searching out. I have experiences I've had that I couldn't imagine having, and I didn't trying to talk to people about it. I got so many blank stares that I just shut up for a while thinking, okay, I can't even talk about this to anybody. Perhaps somebody will come into my life I can talk about it with. And the more time went on, the more people like you I found that we could sit down and just have a conversation about things without any judgment, without any preconceived notions about uh, religion or how things were supposed to be with you in life. It was just an open relationship where we could explore life together. And
Yeah.
I began to realize, oh, the world is full of people like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that in the what is referred to as the shift movement, and in all the different groups that I belong to that are in this field of conscious life and conscious business. In the last 20 years, I've observed that the ratio of men to women is about 80% women and 20% men. And it kind of correlates with my friendships, in that most of my close friendships up until now have been with women, purely because it's so rare for me to find a man who is prepared to communicate at the level that I want to communicate with. And yet most women find that so much easier, to talk about these things, to talk about what you really think, what you really feel. The way our culture has educated men to not express their feelings and their emotions, and even the concept that there is masculine and feminine energy inside every human being, that masculine and feminine energy has nothing to do with whether you came into a male body or a female body, that we actually have both. And that most men were taught to just completely disconnect from the feminine energy, the loving and the caring and the nurturing energy that's inside of them, meant that I just found it really hard to have close friendships with males because I just couldn't communicate with them at the level that felt natural to me.
Hmm. So you mentioned just then about conscious business, and
Yeah.
you're involved in working with businesses involved with consciousness in a way.
Yeah, there's been an impulse in me for a long time to share and tell the story of conscious business. About 5 years ago, I did a training program through an organization called Humanities Team, who ran a training program in conscious business. And I remember saying at the time to other people on that program that I understood what conscious business is inside of me, but I didn't have the language to express it. And what I needed to learn was the language of conscious business. And part of my journey was to establish the PhD in Me platform first, because that is very, very much about the individual and about the growth and the expansion in the individual. But everything that happens in the individual also happens in the collective. And so the PhD in Me will evolve into a PhD in We, so that that same message and that same invitation goes into the collective, and whether that collective be a team or a work group or a small business or a large corporation, to go on that same journey together. And for me, I've seen and worked in so many unconscious businesses, and it was funny because they were a real gift. I needed to recognize what an unconscious business was in order to then also recognize what a conscious business could be. And there are many, many different definitions of what it is to be in a conscious in conscious business. But one of them is an organization that learns to allow people to show up who they really are. That the Gary and the Chris who are speaking now don't have to be put aside if we go into a workplace, because the word professional means that you can't express the things that we're talking about now. That's an old paradigm way of thinking that is very rapidly dying out and has to die out for us to continue on this journey. So if you ask an organization, how well does your business nurture? And I said, what do you mean nurture? What does that have to do with being in business? Well, it has everything to do with being in business, because people need to be loved and nurtured, and not just in the home and not just as little children, but as all human beings experiencing life. So we learn to nurture each other in our one-to-one relationships, but in our corporate culture and in the story that is a business, that needs to become part of that. And so we need to change our lexicon, our dictionary in business, so that the word love actually has a place in business. Because again, you would in most boardrooms to say, what the hell does love have to do with business? It has everything to do with business, because we're simply a group of individuals experiencing life and getting together as a collective to share an aspect of that life. So removing it from the practice of business, it's like that old saying, work-life balance. What a crazy phrase that was. Is how can you have a balance between work and life? There is only life. And what you choose to call work is just another experience in life. There is no separation. And if there is a separation between the two, then you suffer the consequences of how you feel and how you experience life. If you separate the fun part of life and the personal part of life from the work part or the professional part, it makes no sense to separate the two.
Yeah. So it seems like instead of saying, oh, I have my life and then I have work, it's better to look at it as, okay, this is life experiencing work. Oh, this is life experiencing the weekend.
Exactly. And there's only one part of me. I spent many years working in sales, and it was a real gift because I learned the art of storytelling. But if I was with a client, they got the same Chris as my kids got if I read them a bedtime story, or a friend who I sat down with over a beer or a coffee. I just couldn't show up in a different mode when I was a salesperson than when I was a husband or a lover or a father or a friend. There was only one me. Anything else was just inauthentic.
Hmm. I heard an Indian guru describe personality. He said, what do you need a personality for?" He
Yeah.
said, he said personality comes from, I think it was Italian word persona, which means a mask.
Yes.
He said that comes from like a play. He said,
Yes.
and he said, you put these on different times during the day, every day anyway. You put on a different one when you're working and a different one with your kids. But the person behind the mask, who's behind the mask, this is the same one.
Yeah, and it's funny because 3, 4 decades ago, I studied that whole concept of personalities and different personalities, and did the personality tests, and what the personality tests said was how I was presenting myself. But what didn't sit right with me was that they said that our personalities are set in concrete and are hard coded and are how we arrive. And that didn't feel right. And the more I went down this journey, as my beliefs started to change and as my worldview and my life view started to change, when I did those tests again, they came out the opposite to how they did earlier on. They were completely different. And I realized that our personalities are the sum of all of our learned beliefs. And that's what we express in what is measured in those tests as our personality. It is the sum of all of our learned beliefs about every aspect of life. And as that grows and expands and changes, so does what those personality tests come. So it is nothing but a mask. You're 100% right.
Yeah. Wow. Chris, I think this has been an absolutely fabulous conversation. I have learned so much from talking to you, and things that I'm going to think about. To our listener, um, let's. I'm going to ask you to leave them with one thing that they could give, that you could give them, just for good direction in life, and uh, to uh, to experience this love and joy that you have found. What would you say to someone listening?
Learn to love yourself first, because that's where it comes from. It comes from the inside out. And I'm a firm believer that we can never, ever genuinely love anybody or anything else more than we love ourselves. And so learn to love that essence, learn to love who you are, how you are, and know that it's perfect. There's this little cliche that I heard decades ago that I always liked. Happiness is offering yourself to the world and knowing that it's enough.
That's beautiful.
Knowing that we are enough.
Learn to love yourself because you are enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chris, I have really appreciate you coming on here today, and appreciate your enthusiasm and just this this love and joy that you bring to your life and to everyone else's. So we will
Gary, I've really enjoyed the time we've shared together. It's been lots of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
well, thank you for coming. We will talk to you again sometime, and hopefully have another show.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, Chris.
Thanks. Bye-bye.